Admiral Kethvar's four eyes tracked the tactical display with growing unease. In 300 cycles of service to the Galactic Empire, he had never seen anything like it. The unknown vessel hung motionless in the void, 50,000 kilometers, off their starboard bow. It was small, barely the size of a cargo hauler, yet it had appeared without warning in the middle of Imperial space. No jump signature, no energy trail, no distortion wake. One moment, empty space, the next moment, this. Sensor report, Kethvar commanded, his serpentine form coiled behind the command throne of the dreadnought Eternal Glory. Lieutenant Zexta, her blue-scaled hands dancing across holographic controls, shook her head in confusion. Admiral, the readings make no sense. The ship registers as both there and not there. Our quantum scanners show solid matter, but our gravitational sensors detect nothing. It's like it exists in a different layer of reality. That's impossible, muttered Commander Vorth from his position at the weapons console. The bear-like Ursinian's fur bristled with agitation. Nothing can hide from Imperial sensors. Nothing. Kethvar's tail twitched, a sign of deep concern among his species. The Empire had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. They had conquered every species, cataloged every technology, mapped every corner of known space. There were no more mysteries. There were no more unknowns. Until now. "Hail them," the Admiral ordered. "No response to standard frequencies," reported Communications Officer Dalnan, her insectoid limbs clicking nervously. "They're not using any known communication protocols." "Then use the Universal Translator Matrix. Try everything, radio waves, quantum entanglement, even light patterns." For several tense minutes the bridge crew worked frantically. The mysterious ship remained silent, floating like a ghost in the darkness. Its hull was smooth and dark, reflecting no light, as if it were made of crystallized shadow. Suddenly, the ship moved. Every being on the bridge froze as the impossible happened before their eyes. The vessel didn't accelerate. It simply translated from one position to another, covering 50 kilometers in the space between heartbeats. No engine, flare, no energy signature, no physics-defying impossibility that could be explained by known technology. "By the void," whispered Zexta. "It just stepped sideways through space." Admiral Kethvar felt a chill run down his spine. In all the Empire's vast databases, in all their conquered technologies, nothing moved like that. The ship had somehow bypassed the fundamental laws of physics, laws that the Empire's greatest scientists insisted were universal constants. "Admiral," Commander Vorth's voice was tight with barely controlled fear, "recommend we eliminate the threat before—" The unknown ship moved again. This time it appeared directly above the Eternal Glory, close enough that its shadow fell across the dreadnought's hull. Alarms screamed across the bridge as the ship's defensive systems tried to process what had just happened. "Impossible," Kethvar breathed. "Our shields should have prevented any approach. They should have—" The communication array crackled to life with a sound unlike anything they had heard before. Not words, not data, but something that seemed to speak directly to their minds. "We greet you, children of the stars. We have traveled far to meet you." The voice was calm, measured, and terrifyingly alien. It spoke in perfect galactic standard, yet somehow each crew member heard it in their native tongue simultaneously. "This is Admiral Kethvar of the Imperial Dreadnought. Eternal Glory," the Admiral responded, struggling to maintain his composure. "You are in violation of Imperial space. Identify yourself immediately." A pause. Then, "We are human, and we have questions about your empire." The word human meant nothing to any of them. It wasn't in any Imperial database, wasn't part of any known species classification. Yet the way it was spoken carried weight, as if it should mean something profound. "Unknown species designation," Kethvar replied carefully. "State your point. Of origin and purpose." Another pause, longer this time. When the voice returned, there was something different about it, something that made the Admiral's combat instincts scream warnings. "We come from a small blue world on the edge of what you call the outer spiral. A world you marked for conquest and colonization in your files. A world designated as expendable. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. In the tactical display, the unknown ship hung motionless above them, casting its impossible shadow. "I'm afraid I don't understand," Admiral Kethavar said, though a cold certainty was forming in his chest. "Let me make it clearer," the human voice replied. 3 years ago, your empire sent a survey fleet to our world. They cataloged our species as pre-industrial primitives. They noted our planet's resources, water, minerals, arable land. They classified us as minimal resistance expected and scheduled our world for strip mining in the next colonization wave. Kethavar's memory banks retrieved the file instantly. Sol 3, third planet of an unremarkable yellow star. Population, approximately 8 billion primitive bipeds. Technology level, chemical rockets and basic electronics. Defense capability, negligible. The survey had been routine, unremarkable. The world was indeed scheduled for resource extraction once the current expansion phase completed. Your survey was inaccurate, the human continued. And now there was definitely something cold in that voice. "You see, Admiral, humans have a particular talent. When faced with extinction, we don't simply accept it. We adapt, we overcome, and we get very, very creative." The unknown ship pulsed once with soft blue light. "In 3 years, Admiral Kethavar, we learned things about the universe that your empire hasn't discovered in 10,000 years of conquest. We learned to step between dimensions. We learned to fold space like paper. We learned to touch the quantum foam that underlies reality itself." Commander Vorth was slowly reaching for the weapons controls, but Admiral Kethavar held up a restraining hand. Something told him that hostile action would be inadvisable. "And now," the human voice concluded, "we have questions about your empire, about your methods, about your morality." "What kind of questions?" Kethavar asked, though he already dreaded the answer. "The kind that require very honest answers, Admiral. The kind that will determine whether your empire continues to exist or learns what it means to face extinction." The tactical display flickered, and Admiral Kethavar's blood turned to ice. The single human ship was no longer alone. Around them, space was filling with dozens of identical vessels, each one appearing from nothing, each one moving in ways that defied every law of physics the Empire knew. They were surrounded. "Now then," the human voice said pleasantly, "shall we begin?" Chapter 2. The Interrogation. The human ships hung in space like predators circling wounded prey. Admiral Kethavar counted 47 of them, each identical to the first, each impossible in its own right. They had appeared without warning, without signatures that Imperial sensors could detect. They simply were. "Admiral," Commander Vorth whispered urgently, "we should signal for reinforcement. The 4th Fleet is only 2 jumps away." "No," Kethavar said quietly. He had been studying the tactical display, and what he saw there chilled him to his core. The human ships weren't just surrounding them, they were positioned at precise, mathematical intervals that suggested they understood Imperial tactics better than most Imperial officers. "Something tells me reinforcements would only make this worse." The lead human ship pulsed with that strange blue light again, and the voice returned. "Admiral, we're going to share something with you. A memory from our world. We think you should see what your Empire's survey recorded." The main view screen shimmered and suddenly displayed scenes from a world Kethavar barely remembered. The 3rd planet of the Sol system. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling in beautiful patterns, cities that glowed with artificial light, billions of the bipedal creatures going about their lives, unaware that they had been marked for extermination. "This is Earth," the human voice said. "Our home. Your surveyors spent 3 days cataloging it. Would you like to know what they missed?" The scene shifted. Now it showed the humans themselves, not primitive savages as the survey had suggested, but beings of surprising complexity. They built soaring towers of metal and glass. They created art that moved the soul. They wrote music that captured the essence of joy and sorrow. They loved. They dreamed. They reached for the stars with a passion that was almost painful to witness. Your surveyors saw only our technology, the voice continued. They measured our weapons, counted our ships, calculated our resistance potential. They determined that we could be eliminated with minimal force. They were wrong about that last part. Admiral Kethvar found himself leaning forward despite his fear. There was something in the images that stirred an emotion he hadn't felt in decades, something that might have been shame. You see, Admiral, humans have something your empire has forgotten, something you lose when you become conquerors instead of explorers. We have necessity. When faced with extinction, we don't accept it. We transcend it. The images changed again. Now they showed humans working frantically, desperately, brilliantly. Scientists poring over equations that hurt to look at. Engineers building devices that seemed to bend reality around them. Philosophers and mathematicians and physicists collaborating in ways that produced results far beyond what any individual could achieve. In 3 years, we did what your empire couldn't do in 10 millennia, the voice said with quiet pride. We broke the barriers. We stepped outside the normal flow of space-time. We learned to exist in the spaces between dimensions. Lieutenant, Zexta's voice was barely a whisper. Admiral, the energy readings from their ships, they're not possible. They're drawing power from somewhere that shouldn't exist. From everywhere, Lieutenant, the human voice replied, somehow hearing her despite the private comm channel. We learned to tap the quantum vacuum, the zero-point energy that fills the void between atoms. We learned to borrow power from parallel universes. We learned to make the impossible routine. Commander Vorth's massive paw hovered over the weapons console. Admiral, we have to... You have to what, Commander? The human voice asked gently. Destroy us. With what weapons? Your particle beams operate in normal space-time. Your missiles follow ballistic trajectories. Your shields depend on known physics. One of the human ships flickered and suddenly materialized inside the Eternal Glory's bridge, passing through the hull as if it were made of mist. Crew members dove for cover as the impossible vessel hovered 3 meters above the deck, its dark hull reflecting nothing. We exist partially outside your reality now, the voice explained conversationally. Your weapons cannot touch what isn't entirely there. The ship faded and reappeared in normal space, outside the dreadnought once more. Admiral Kethvar felt the weight of 10,000 years of imperial dominance crashing down around him. The Empire had ruled through superior technology, overwhelming force, and the certainty that no species could challenge their supremacy. Now that certainty was gone. What do you want? He asked, and was ashamed of how small his voice sounded. Answers, the human replied. How many worlds has your empire destroyed? How many species have you eliminated? How many civilizations have you erased from existence? Kethvar's throat went dry. The exact numbers are classified. Thousands of worlds. Hundreds of species. It was necessary for the greater good. For peace and order in the galaxy. Peace, the human voice repeated thoughtfully. Tell me, Admiral, what do you know about the Vitar? The name hit Kethvar like a physical blow. The Vitar had been one of the Empire's earliest conquests, a species of philosophers and artists who had chosen self-destruction rather than submit to imperial rule. They had triggered a quantum cascade that destroyed their entire solar system rather than let it be enslaved. They were extremists, Kethvar said weakly. They chose death over civilization. They chose death over slavery, the human corrected. What about the Melkari, the crystal singers of the Andorian Nebula? Another name from the distant past. The Melkari had been energy beings, living crystals that sang in harmonies that could heal broken souls. The Empire had harvested them for their psychic resonance properties. They had screamed for 3 days as they died. Or the Zephyrians. The human pressed, the ones who could photosynthesize starlight? The Empire turned them into living batteries, didn't they? Kept them in stasis pods to power your war machines? Each name was a weight added to Keithvar's shoulders. Civilizations he had helped destroy. Species he had helped exterminate. All in the name of imperial expansion, imperial order, imperial peace. You don't remember them all, do you? The human asked, and now there was genuine sadness in the voice. They've become numbers in your files, statistics in your databases, but each one was a universe of dreams and hopes and possibilities that you snuffed out forever. It was. We were bringing order to chaos, Kethvar said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. The Empire brings peace. The Empire brings death, the human replied. Peace is what grows in the garden after the gardener stops pulling up all the flowers that don't match his vision. The view screen showed image after image now. World stripped bare, species extinct, civilizations reduced to footnotes in imperial history. 10,000 years of conquest laid out in all its terrible glory. But here's what interests us most, Admiral, the human continued. In all those years of conquest, has your empire ever encountered a species that fought back successfully? Has anyone ever made you question whether what you're doing is right? Kethvar thought for a long moment. The answer was no. Every species the empire encountered was either absorbed or destroyed. Resistance was always futile in the end. The strong dominated the weak. That was the natural order. No, he admitted. Never. Then you've learned nothing, the human said with what sounded like genuine regret. You've conquered the galaxy, but you've never grown. You've destroyed every teacher who might have shown you a different path. The human ships began to move, forming a complex pattern around the eternal glory. Space seemed to ripple around them as they shifted through dimensions that imperial science couldn't even perceive. So now we're going to teach you something new, Admiral, the human voice said. We're going to show you what it feels like to be on the other side of conquest, what it feels like to face extinction. You're going to destroy us? Kethvar asked. Oh, no, the human replied, and there was something almost playful in the tone. That would make us no better than you. Instead, we're going to give you a choice, the same choice you've given to thousands of species over the millennia. The tactical display changed, showing not just the human ships, but something else, something vast and terrible approaching from the edge of the system. Submit, the human said simply, or face the consequences. Chapter 3. The Choice. What appeared on the tactical display defied every assumption Admiral Kethvar had about human capabilities. It wasn't a ship in any conventional sense. It was a structure, vast beyond comprehension, that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Parts of it were visible in normal space, while other sections flickered in and out of reality like thoughts half-remembered. By the void, whispered Lieutenant Zexta, her scaled hands trembling over her instruments. Admiral, that thing it's larger than a moon. How did they build something like that in 3 years? They didn't build it here, Commander Vorth growled, his ursine instinct screaming danger. Nothing that size could have been constructed without the Empire detecting it. The human voice carried a note of gentle correction. You're both right and wrong, Commander. We didn't build it in your universe. We built it in the spaces between spaces, in the quantum foam that exists in the gaps of reality. Then we invited it to visit. Admiral Kethvar stared at the impossible structure as it continued to phase into normal space. Sections of it were clearly artificial, geometric patterns that spoke of intelligence and purpose. Other parts looked organic, almost alive, pulsing with energies that made his sensors weep confused data. What is it? He asked, though he dreaded the answer. Home, the human replied simply. When we realized that your empire would eventually come for Earth, we made a decision. We wouldn't just defend our world, we would preserve our entire civilization. We built this in a pocket dimension, then moved our most important assets inside. Our art, our literature, our music, our children, our future. The structure was fully materialized now, and Kethvar could see that it wasn't just one construction, but dozens, perhaps hundreds of smaller vessels connected by bridges and tunnels that existed in folded space. It was a city that spanned dimensions, a civilization that had learned to live outside the normal flow of reality, Impressive, he admitted grudgingly. But even this cannot stand against the full might of the Empire. When word of your existence reaches the core worlds, word will not reach the core worlds, the human interrupted. At least not the word you think. Another human ship materialized on the bridge of the eternal glory, this one different from the others. Instead of smooth, dark hull, this one was transparent, and inside it Kethavar could see figures moving, bipedal forms that matched the images from Earth, but somehow more. They seemed to exist in several dimensions at once, their forms shifting, between solid matter and pure energy. Admiral, the human voice continued, we're going to make you an offer. But first, you need to understand exactly what you're dealing with. The transparent ship pulsed, and suddenly Kethavar's mind was filled with images, not shown on screens but directly implanted in his consciousness. He saw human civilization as it truly was, not the primitive world described in imperial surveys, but something far more complex and beautiful. He saw cities that existed in multiple dimensions, where buildings could be bigger inside than outside. He saw humans who had learned to upload their consciousness into quantum computers, achieving a form of immortality that the Empire's greatest scientists had only theorized about. He saw artists painting with pure energy, musicians composing, symphonies in gravitational waves, poets writing verses in the quantum fluctuations of space-time itself. This is what your Empire marked for destruction, the voice said sadly. This is what you deemed expendable. But then the images changed, showing him something else. Humans working with other species, not conquering them, but collaborating with them. The crystalline Velkari, who the Empire had declared extinct, were alive and thriving in human-protected dimensional pockets. The energy-based Zephyrians, supposedly harvested to extinction, were teaching humans how to photosynthesize cosmic radiation. Every species your Empire has destroyed, the human explained, we have been saving. Every civilization you've eliminated, we have been preserving. For 3 years we've been rescuing the survivors of your conquests, giving them new homes in spaces your Empire can't reach. Admiral Kethavar felt the universe tilt around him. That's impossible. We have records. Confirmation of extinction. Biological surveys showing what we wanted you to see, the human corrected gently. Admiral, your Empire is very good at destroying things, but you're not very good at recognizing when things don't want to be destroyed. The transparent ship faded, but the mental connection remained. Kethavar could feel the presence of the human speaker, a consciousness that seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously. Now, the voice continued, here's our offer. We could destroy your Empire. Not just this ship, not just this fleet, but the entire structure of imperial civilization. We have the power now. We've learned things about the universe that would let us reach into the core worlds themselves and turn off the stars that warm them. Commander Vorth's fur bristled with rage. You dare, but we won't, the human continued, ignoring the interruption. Because destruction is your way, not ours. Instead, we're going to give you the same choice you gave us, evolve or perish. I don't understand, Kethavar said. The Empire's expansion ends here, the human explained. No more conquests, no more extinctions, no more treating other species as resources to be harvested. You can continue to exist, but as partners in a galactic community, not as its masters. The Admiral's mind reeled. The Empire cannot simply always stop. Our entire civilization is built on expansion, on the conquest of new worlds. Without that, you might actually have to learn how to create instead of just taking, the human suggested. You might have to discover what it means to build something beautiful instead of just building something powerful. On the tactical display, more structures were appearing. Not ships, but space habitats, research stations, artistic installations that served no military purpose whatsoever. Each one was impossibly beautiful, existing in harmonious balance with the others. This is what we're offering the galaxy, the human said. Not conquest, but collaboration. Not empire, but community. Not uniformity, but diversity, celebrated and protected. And if we refuse? Kethavar asked, though he already knew the answer. Then you'll discover what every species you've conquered learned, the human replied sadly. That resistance is not futile when the resistors have transcended the limitations you think define reality. The massive structure at the edge of the system pulsed once, and every system on the eternal glory went dead for exactly 1 second. Life support, artificial gravity, tactical displays, communications, everything stopped, then resumed, as if nothing had happened. The message was clear. The humans could have destroyed them all in that single moment, but chose not to. We're not your enemies, Admiral, the human voice said gently. We're your teachers. But like all students, you have to choose whether you want to learn. Lieutenant Zexta's voice was barely a whisper. Admiral, incoming transmission from the 4th Fleet. They're requesting status update and ETA for the sector patrol completion. Kethavar stared at the communication request. A simple response would bring Imperial reinforcements, would escalate this encounter into something that could engulf the galaxy in war. But what kind of war? How could the Empire fight an enemy that existed partially outside reality itself? What happens to my crew? He asked finally. To my ship? To me? That depends, the human replied, on what you choose to become. The Admiral looked around his bridge at beings who had served with him for decades. Zexta, whose scientific curiosity had always been stronger than her military conditioning. Vorth, whose warrior's honor was matched by a surprising capacity for loyalty. Dalnan, whose communication skills had prevented more conflicts than her weapons training had started. These were good beings, he realized. They deserved better than to be tools of an empire that had forgotten how to create, that knew only how to consume. If I choose cooperation, he said slowly, what guarantee do I have that humanity won't simply become the new empire? That you won't decide the galaxy needs your guidance whether it wants it or not? The human was quiet for a long moment. When the voice returned, it carried a weight of sadness that spoke of hard-won wisdom. None, came the honest reply. We're not perfect, Admiral. We're just trying to be better than we were. And one of the things we've learned is that any species that tries to rule the entire galaxy eventually becomes a monster. So we're not trying to rule it. We're trying to free it. Free it to do what? To grow. To explore. To become something wonderful that none of us can imagine yet. Admiral Kethavar closed his 4 eyes and made the hardest decision of his 300-year life. Lieutenant Zexta, he said quietly, respond to the 4th Fleet. Tell them the sector patrol encountered no hostile activity. All clear. Sir? Zexta's voice was uncertain. Tell them, Lieutenant, that's an order. As Zexta reluctantly complied, Kethavar opened his eyes and addressed the human ship directly. What happens now? Now, the human voice replied, and for the first time he could hear genuine warmth in it. You learn what it means to be part of something larger than yourself. Something beautiful. The human ships began to fade from normal space, returning to whatever dimensional realm they called home. But before they disappeared entirely, the voice spoke once more. Admiral, you've just taken the first step in a journey that will transform not just your empire, but your entire understanding of what it means to be alive in this universe. Welcome to the beginning of everything. And then they were gone, leaving only starlight and the vast structure at the edge of the system, a beacon of impossible hope in the darkness between worlds. Chapter 4. The New Path. 3 months later, Admiral Kethavar stood in a place that shouldn't exist, breathing air that had never known a world, looking out at stars that were arranged in patterns that spelled out music across the cosmic dark. The human sanctuary was beyond anything the Empire had ever imagined. It existed in folded space, occupying the same coordinates as empty void but existing in dimensions that Imperial science had never even theorized. Here, the laws of physics were more like gentle suggestions, and reality was something that could be collaboratively edited by conscious will. Still having trouble adapting to non-Euclidean architecture? Asked Dr. Sarah Chen, one of the human scientists who had become his guide in this impossible place. Kethavar's 4 eyes tracked the impossible geometry of the corridor they walked through. Walls that curved inward but somehow contained more space than they should. Ceilings that were simultaneously above and below them. My species evolved in 3-dimensional space, he admitted. This is challenging. Dr. Chen smiled. She was young by human standards, perhaps 30 of their solar cycles, but she moved through the dimensional maze with the confidence of someone born to it. Your empire spent 10,000 years conquering 3-dimensional space, she said, but there are so many more dimensions to explore. Some of them are mathematical, 11-dimensional hyperspaces where equations become tangible objects. Others are conceptual, realms where emotions have mass and thoughts have momentum. They emerged onto what Dr. Chen called a viewing platform, though it bore no resemblance to anything Kethavar understood by that term. It was a space that existed in several dimensions simultaneously, offering views of normal space, hyperspace, and the quantum foam that underlay reality itself. Show him the memorial, Dr. Chen said to the air. The platform shifted, and suddenly Kethavar was looking at something that made his throat tighten with emotions he hadn't felt in centuries. It was vast beyond comprehension, a structure that existed primarily as information, as memory made manifest. And in it, he could see them all. Every species the Empire had destroyed, every civilization that had been erased from normal space. But they weren't gone. They were here, preserved not just as data but as living cultures, as continuing stories, as dreams that had been allowed to keep dreaming. This is the Velkari home song, Dr. Chen explained, gesturing to a section of the memorial that pulsed with crystalline harmonies. They're teaching our children how to sing mathematics. And here, she pointed to another section, where energy patterns danced in complex spirals. The Zephyrians are showing us how to paint with pure starlight. They're all here, Kethavar whispered. Everyone we thought we'd destroyed. Not all, Dr. Chen said sadly. We couldn't save everyone. Some species were eliminated before we learned they existed. Some chose extinction rather than preservation, but we saved who we could, and we're still looking for more. She led him to another section of the platform where he could see normal space displaying tactical information. Imperial fleets moving in their ancient patterns, still carrying out the expansion protocols that had driven them for millennia. Your colleagues haven't noticed your absence yet, Dr. Chen observed. The reports you've been filing show routine patrol activities, no anomalies detected. But that can't last forever. Kethavar had been dreading this moment. For 3 months, he had been living a double life, officially carrying out his duties as an Imperial Admiral while secretly working with the humans to understand their technology and philosophy. But every day made it harder to return to the eternal glory, harder to pretend that the old ways still made sense. The Empire will notice eventually, he agreed. When they do, they'll send investigators, and when the investigators don't return, they'll send the full fleet, Dr. Chen finished. We know, we've been preparing. You mean to fight them? Dr. Chen shook her head. We mean to teach them, just like we taught you. She gestured, and the viewing platform shifted again. Now Kethavar could see something that made his heart skip beats. Imperial ships, dozens of them, scattered throughout the sanctuary. And their crews, beings he recognized, officers he had served with, soldiers who had sworn the same oaths he had, were working alongside humans and rescued species, learning the same impossible technologies he had been studying. How many? He asked, barely believing what he was seeing. More every day, Dr. Chen replied. It turns out that when you show people what the Empire really is, when you let them see the cost of 10,000 years of conquest, most of them choose differently. Lieutenant Zexta emerged from behind a structure that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously, her scales bright with excitement. Admiral, you have to see what the Melkari taught me about quantum harmonics. They can turn mathematical equations into physical objects. Behind her came Commander Vorth, his massive frame somehow managing to navigate the non-Euclidean architecture with surprising grace. Admiral, the humans want to show us something called Cooperative engineering. They say it's how you build things when you're more interested in beauty than conquest. Kethvar felt a warmth spreading through his chest, an emotion he hadn't experienced since he was young, since before the Empire had taught him that conquest was the only purpose that mattered. "Admiral," Dr. Chen said quietly, "there's someone who wants to meet you." She led him to a section of the sanctuary that felt different from the others, older somehow, more fundamental. Here, the impossible architecture gave way to something simpler. A garden that existed in normal three-dimensional space, filled with plants from 1,000 different worlds. In the center of the garden sat a figure that made Kethvar's breath catch. It was human but ancient beyond anything he had expected. Not physically old, but carrying the weight of years beyond counting. When the figure looked up, Kethvar saw eyes that had witnessed the birth and death of stars. "Admiral Kethvar," the figure said, rising gracefully to its feet. "I'm Marcus Webb. I suppose you could call me the coordinator of this project." "You're their leader?" Kethvar asked. Marcus laughed, a sound like water running over stones. "Humans don't really have leaders the way your empire does. We have coordinators, facilitators, people who help organize collaborative efforts, but no one person makes decisions for all of us. Then how do you maintain order? How do you prevent chaos?" Marcus gestured to the garden around them, where beings from dozens of different species were working together, tending plants that could never have grown on any single world. "This is our order, Admiral. Not the imposed uniformity of empire, but the emergent harmony of diversity working together." Kethvar watched a Zephyrian energy being teaching a young human child how to coax sunlight from the quantum foam, while a Velkari crystal singer provided harmonic accompaniment. It should have been chaos, but instead it was beautiful. "The Empire is coming," Kethvar said. "When they realize what's happening here, they'll bring everything they have. Thousands of ships, millions of soldiers, weapons that can crack planets." Marcus nodded calmly. "We know. We've been watching your Imperial networks. The Fourth Fleet is already asking questions about unusual sensor readings in this sector. The investigation ships will arrive within the week. And you're not afraid?" Marcus looked out at the garden, at the impossible sanctuary, at the thousands of beings who had found refuge here from Imperial conquest. "Admiral, do you know what humanity learned during our 3 years of preparation? We learned that fear is just another limitation to be transcended. We were afraid of extinction, so we learned to exist outside normal space-time. We were afraid of death, so we learned to preserve consciousness in quantum substrates. We were afraid of powerlessness, so we learned to collaborate with the fundamental forces of the universe itself." He turned back to Kethvar with a smile that was somehow both gentle and terrifying. "Your empire taught us something valuable, Admiral. It taught us that when existence itself is threatened, the only response is to become something greater than what you were before. So that's what we did. We became something your empire cannot understand, cannot conquer, and cannot destroy." "But what about after?" Kethvar asked. "What happens when the empire falls? What prevents humanity from becoming the next great conqueror?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching a group of children from a dozen different species playing together, in ways that bent the local laws of physics. "That's the real test, isn't it?" he said finally. "We've learned to transcend physical limitations, but the hardest limitation to transcend is the desire to control others. That's why we built this place the way we did, not as a hierarchy with humans at the top, but as a true collaboration where every species contributes their unique perspective." He gestured to the memorial, visible through the dimensional walls of the garden. "Every species your empire destroyed had something unique to offer the universe. Knowledge that could never be recovered, perspectives that could never be replicated. We're not trying to replace the empire with a human empire. We're trying to build something that the galaxy has never seen before, a true confederation of equals." "And if it fails?" Kethvar asked. "If some crisis forces humanity to choose between cooperation and survival?" Marcus's smile faded, replaced by an expression of profound seriousness. "Then we'll have become what we fought against, and the species we've saved will have to save the galaxy from us." He paused, looking directly into Kethvar's eyes. That's why we need you, Admiral. You and every other Imperial officer who chooses to join us, not as converts to human ideology, but as guardians against human corruption. Because the moment we start thinking we know what's best for everyone else, we'll need someone to remind us that we're wrong. Kethavar felt something shift inside him, not just understanding, but purpose. For 3 centuries, he had served an empire that claimed to bring order to chaos, but this was different. This was choosing to build something better, knowing that it might fail, knowing that the builders themselves might become the next threat to overcome. The investigation ships will arrive in 6 days, he said quietly. Admiral Vextor commanding. He's not like me. He won't listen to reason. He'll see only enemies to be destroyed. Marcus nodded. We know about Admiral Vextor. His psychological profile suggests someone who has never questioned the Empire's mission, never doubted that conquest equals civilization. Then you know he'll attack immediately. We're counting on it, Marcus said, surprising him. Admiral, the greatest gift your Empire ever gave us was showing us what we didn't want to become. The second greatest gift will be providing us with an opportunity to demonstrate what we've chosen to become instead. Before Kethvar could ask what that meant, the air around them shimmered and Dr. Chen appeared, her expression urgent. Marcus, they're here. 6 ships, Dreadnought class. They just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Marcus stood, brushing soil from his hands. Right on schedule. Admiral Kethvar, would you like to help us welcome your former colleagues? Admiral Vextor's scarred face was a map of 40 years of Imperial conquest. His ship, the Iron Resolve, had broken more species than most officers ever encountered. Now he stared at his tactical display with the cold fury of a predator who had found his territory invaded. Report, he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never been disobeyed. 6 human vessels detected. His tactical officer replied. Same configuration as described in Admiral Kethvar's classified reports. They're maintaining position around that structure. Vextor studied the massive construction that hung in space like a challenge to everything he understood about engineering. It was beautiful in a way that offended him. Too organic, too chaotic, too obviously the product of minds that had never learned proper Imperial design principles. Any response to our hails? Negative, sir. They're not using any known communication frequencies. Then we'll communicate in the only language that matters, Vextor growled. All ships, battle formation. Prepare to engage. His fleet moved with the precision of centuries of practice. 6 dreadnoughts arranging themselves in a perfect assault pattern, their weapons charging, their shields at maximum strength. It was overwhelming force applied with surgical precision, the Imperial way. The human ships did nothing. They hung in space like meditation stones, dark and silent and somehow patient, as if they were waiting for something. Target the central structure, Vextor ordered. Full barrage. Reduce it to component atoms. Sir, his communications officer interrupted. Incoming transmission. It's Admiral Kethvar. Vextor's eyes narrowed. Put him through. The main screen shimmered, and Kethvar's familiar form appeared. But something was different about him, a calmness that Vextor had never seen before, as if he had found some inner peace that had eluded him for 3 centuries of service. Vextor, Kethvar said simply, don't do this. Admiral Kethvar, Vextor replied with cold formality, you have been declared missing in action. Your ship has been broadcasting false patrol reports. You are ordered to return to Imperial space immediately for debriefing. I can't do that, Kethvar said. Vextor, you need to see what I've seen. You need to understand what the Empire really is. The Empire is order imposed upon chaos, Vextor snapped. The Empire is civilization spreading to the dark corners of the galaxy. The Empire is everything that stands between the universe and barbarism. The Empire is death, Kethvar replied sadly. Death of species, death of cultures, death of possibilities we can't even imagine. These humans showed me something different. They showed me what it means to create instead of destroy. Vextor's lips curled in disgust. They showed you weakness. They corrupted you with their primitive philosophies. But weakness can be cured, old friend. Surrender now and we'll help you remember who you are. I remember exactly who I am, Kethvar said. I'm someone who spent 300 years serving a lie. But it's not too late for you, Vextor. It's not too late for any of us. Enough, Vextor snarled. You have 30 seconds to surrender, Admiral. After that, we will treat you as we treat all enemies of the Empire. The transmission ended, leaving Vextor staring at empty space where his oldest friend's face had been. Sir, his tactical officer reported. Weapons are charged and ready. Fire, Vextor commanded. 6 dreadnoughts unleashed their fury simultaneously. Particle beams that could shatter planets, quantum torpedoes that could collapse stars, energy, weapons that could reduce entire fleets to subatomic particles. It was enough firepower to sterilize a dozen worlds. The beams passed harmlessly through the human ships as if they were made of light. What? Vextor stared at his tactical display in disbelief. That's impossible. Nothing can... The human ships flickered once like candles in a gentle breeze. Sir, his sensor operator's voice was tight with fear. I'm reading massive energy buildup from the alien structure. Something's happening. What happened next would be discussed in Imperial archives for decades to come, though most of the official accounts would be classified at levels that few beings would ever see. The space around Vextor's fleet began to change. Reality became fluid, malleable, responsive to intentions rather than physics. The stars themselves seemed to shift positions, spelling out words in languages that shouldn't exist. Welcome, said a voice that spoke directly to every mind in the fleet simultaneously. We are human. We greet you in peace. Return fire, Vextor roared. All ships, maximum barrage. The weapons fired again, and again the energy passed through the human vessels without effect. But this time, something else happened. The weapons themselves began to change, their deadly energy transforming into something else entirely. The particle beams became streams of light that painted aurora patterns across the hulls of the Imperial ships. The quantum torpedoes bloomed into flowers of pure energy that danced around the fleet in impossible spirals. The destructive forces that should have annihilated entire worlds became a symphony of beauty that made hardened warriors weep. Your weapons cannot harm what exists partially outside your reality, the human voice explained gently. But we can show you what those weapons could create instead of destroy. Vextor watched in growing horror as his instruments registered something that should have been impossible. His ships were being healed. Microfractures in their hulls were spontaneously repairing themselves. Systems that had been damaged in previous battles were somehow restoring themselves to perfect function. Even the crew members were reporting that old injuries were fading, that chronic ailments were disappearing. What are you doing to us? He demanded. Showing you what your technology could accomplish, the voice replied, if it were guided by creation instead of destruction. Your particle beams could heal instead of kill. Your quantum torpedoes could terraform dead worlds instead of destroying living ones. Your energy weapons could build paradise instead of ensuring hell. One of the human ships materialized directly in front of the Iron Resolve's main view screen. Through its transparent hull, Vextor could see beings that were recognizably human, but somehow more, existing in dimensions his eyes couldn't fully process, moving through space as if it were merely an inconvenient suggestion. Admiral Vextor, the voice continued, and now it seemed to come from the ship before him. We know your history. We know about the Kethmar Rebellion, where you personally executed 3 million civilians to maintain order. We know about the crystalline worlds where you used quantum fire to melt entire continents because their inhabitants refused to submit. We know about all of it. Vextor's blood ran cold. Those operations were classified beyond the highest levels. No one outside the Inner Council should have known about them. And yet, the voice said, we offer you the same choice we offered Admiral Kethvar, the same choice we offer everyone. Evolve or perish. I will never surrender to alien filth, Vextor snarled. We're not asking you to surrender, the voice replied patiently. We're asking you to grow, to become something better than what you are. The space around the fleet began to shift again, And suddenly Vextor found himself looking at something that made his mind reel. It was the memorial, the vast structure where the humans preserved the memories of every species the Empire had destroyed. But now he could see it clearly, could understand what it truly was. It wasn't just a monument. It was a living testament to the galaxy's lost potential, to all the beauty and wisdom and wonder that Imperial conquest had erased forever. And in its quantum crystalline depths, he could see them all. The species he had personally exterminated, still existing in some impossible way, still dreaming their unique dreams. "This is what you destroyed," the voice said sadly. "This is what the Empire has stolen from the universe. Not just lives, not just worlds, but entire ways of understanding existence itself." Vextor saw the Kethmar, the gentle philosophers he had slaughtered for their refusal to embrace Imperial ideology. They were there in the memorial, their thoughts preserved in crystalline matrices, their wisdom still flowing into the greater symphony of galactic consciousness. He saw the crystalline world's inhabitants, silicon-based beings who had experienced time differently than carbon-based life, who had understood the universe in ways that could have revolutionized physics. They were there too, their unique perspective on causality and temporal mechanics still contributing to the collective knowledge of the preserved species. They're all still alive," Vextor whispered, in a manner of speaking. The voice confirmed. "We couldn't save their bodies, but we saved their minds, their cultures, their ways of seeing the universe. They live on in the memorial, teaching us things your Empire never bothered to learn." The display shifted, showing Vextor something even more disturbing. Imperial officers, hundreds of them working alongside the preserved species, learning from beings they had been taught to consider inferior, growing into something larger than what they had been. "Your own people chose this," the voice pointed out. "When shown the truth about what the Empire really is, most choose to become something better. Traitors," Vextor spat, "all of them. Patriots," the voice corrected gently. "They love their species enough to help it evolve beyond the need for conquest." The human ship moved closer, until Vextor could see individual figures within its impossible geometry. One of them looked familiar, a human female he had seen in intelligence reports about the Sol system. "Admiral Vextor," she said, her voice carrying across space without technological assistance. "My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. 3 years ago, your Empire marked my world for destruction. My family, my friends, everyone I had ever loved, all of them were scheduled to die so that your Empire could harvest our planet's resources." Vextor felt no remorse. "Inferior species must make way for superior ones. That is the natural order." "Is it?" Dr. Chen asked. "Then explain this." The space around the fleet shifted once more, and suddenly Vextor was looking at something that challenged every assumption he had ever held about superiority and inferiority. He saw human children playing with young Velkari crystals, learning mathematics that existed in 17 dimensions. He saw elderly Zephyrians teaching human artists how to paint with starlight itself. He saw species that the Empire had classified as primitive, demonstrating technologies that made Imperial science look like crude cave paintings. "Every species you've destroyed," Dr. Chen explained, "had something unique to offer. The Melkari could hear the mathematical harmonies that underlie reality itself. The Velkari could grow crystal matrices that stored pure information without energy loss. The Zephyrians could photosynthesize cosmic radiation and convert it directly into useful work." She gestured to the impossible structure around them. "This sanctuary was built using the combined knowledge of 100 species your Empire considered worthless. Each one contributed something essential, something that couldn't have been achieved by any single race working alone." "Lies," Vextor said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Truth," Dr. Chen replied sadly. "The Empire has been burning libraries for 10,000 years, Admiral. You've been destroying the greatest collection of knowledge and wisdom the galaxy has ever known, one species at a time." The tactical display updated with new information that made Vextor's stomach lurch. More Imperial ships were appearing, not attacking, but surrendering. Entire fleets were laying down their weapons and requesting permission to join the human sanctuary. It's spreading, he realized with growing horror. This infection is spreading throughout the Empire. Not infection, the voice corrected. Awakening. Your people are remembering what it means to build instead of destroy, to nurture instead of conquer, to grow instead of consume. Admiral Kethvar's face appeared on the view screen again, but now he wasn't alone. With him stood beings from a dozen different species, all of them supposedly extinct, all of them working together on something that looked like art and science and philosophy combined into a single transcendent discipline. Vextor, Kethvar, said, "You have a choice. You can cling to the old ways and watch the Empire crumble around you, or you can help us build something better." "I will not betray everything I've sworn to protect," Vextor declared. "Then protect it," Kethvar challenged. "Protect the best parts of our civilization while letting the worst parts die. Help us preserve what's worth saving while discarding what needs to be discarded." The human voice spoke again, patient and inexorable. "Admiral Vextor, your empire is ending, not because we're destroying it, but because it's destroying itself. 10,000 years of conquest have left it hollow inside, unable to create anything new, unable to grow beyond its need to dominate others." The view screen showed images from across Imperial space, rebellions breaking out on 1,000 worlds, entire fleets defecting to join the growing coalition of preserved species, scientists and artists and philosophers choosing collaboration over conquest. "You can be part of building what comes next," the voice continued. "Or you can go down with a system that was already dying before we arrived. But either way, the age of empire is over. The age of cooperation has begun." Vextor stared at the tactical display, at the images of his civilization transforming itself from the inside out. Everything he had believed in, everything he had fought for, everything that had given his life meaning, it was all crumbling away like sand castles before the tide. What would happen to me?" he asked, hating himself for the weakness in his voice. "What happened to Admiral Kethvar?" The voice replied gently. "You would learn. You would grow. You would discover what it means to be part of something larger than yourself. And my crimes, the species I've destroyed, the worlds I've burned." The voice was quiet for a long moment. "Some things cannot be forgiven, Admiral. Some wounds cannot be healed. But you can choose to spend the rest of your existence ensuring that such crimes never happen again." Vextor looked at his tactical display one more time, at the impossible human ships that existed partially outside reality, at the sanctuary that preserved the dreams of the dead, at the future that was being born from the ashes of his empire. "Stand down weapons," he said quietly. "Sir?" his tactical officer asked in confusion. "Stand down weapons," Vextor repeated louder this time. "Send a message to all ships. We are requesting terms for cooperation." As his fleet powered down their weapons systems, Admiral Vextor felt something he hadn't experienced in 40 years of Imperial service: hope. It was terrifying. Epilogue, Seeds of Tomorrow. 1 year later, Admiral Kethvar stood in what had once been the Imperial Senate chamber on the core world of Nexus Prime. The vast hall that had once echoed with proclamations of conquest now hummed with something entirely different. The sound of species from across the galaxy working together to build something unprecedented. The Empire hadn't fallen in the way anyone had expected. There had been no great battles, no dramatic collapse, no heroic last stands. Instead, it had transformed itself from within, evolving into something that the galaxy had never seen before. A true confederation of equals. "The Andromeda Accords are ready for final ratification," announced Zexta, who now served as one of the Coordination Committee's senior analysts. Her scientific curiosity had found new purpose in helping to establish the protocols that would govern interspecies cooperation across the galaxy. "Any remaining objections?" asked Dr. Sarah Chen, who had become humanity's primary representative to the growing confederation. Commander Vorth raised one massive paw. "The Ursinian clans are still concerned about the preservation protocols. We want assurance that no species will be forced to change their fundamental nature in the name of cooperation. Agreed, said Marcus Webb, his ageless features calm as always. Diversity is the foundation of everything we're building. Uniformity is what the Empire tried to impose, and we've seen how that ended. Cathvar smiled as he watched the debate unfold. It was messy, chaotic, sometimes inefficient, everything the Empire had tried to eliminate. But it was also alive in ways the Empire had never been, creative in ways that conquest could never achieve. Admiral, a soft voice said beside him, you look thoughtful. He turned to find Admiral Vextor approaching, but the scarred warrior he remembered was gone. In his place was someone who looked older in some ways, younger in others, worn down by the weight of his past, but renewed by the possibility of his future. I was thinking about the species we couldn't save, Cathvar admitted, the ones that were destroyed before the humans learned to preserve consciousness patterns, the knowledge that's lost forever. Vextor nodded grimly. I carry their names with me. Every species I personally eliminated. I recite them each morning when I wake up, to remember what the Empire cost the universe. And yet here we are, Cathvar mused, building something from the ashes of what we destroyed. Here we are, Vextor agreed, though I sometimes wonder if we deserve the chance to build anything at all. Perhaps that's exactly why we deserve it, suggested a new voice. They turned to see one of the Velkari crystal singers approaching, its crystalline form chiming with harmonics that conveyed complex emotions. Those who remember the cost of destruction are best suited to choose creation instead. The crystal being was one of the success stories of the Preservation Project, a consciousness that had been saved from imperial genocide and given new form in the quantum matrices of the memorial. It now served as one of the Confederation's senior advisors on long-term planning, its unique perspective on time and causality invaluable in designing stable multi-species societies. The memorial dedication is beginning, the Velkari announced. They're waiting for the former Imperial officers to participate. Cathvar, Vextor, and dozens of other former Imperial personnel made their way to the center of the chamber, where a new addition to the memorial had been constructed. This section was different from the others. It wasn't just a repository of preserved consciousness, but an active learning environment where the mistakes of the past could be studied and understood. We gather today, Dr. Chen began, not to celebrate victory, but to remember loss. Not to claim righteousness, but to acknowledge failure. The Empire is gone, but the lessons it taught us must never be forgotten. The ceremony was simple, dignified, and profoundly moving. Representatives from every known species spoke briefly about what had been lost during the Empire's reign. Former Imperial officers shared their experiences, their regrets, their commitment to ensuring that such tragedies never happened again. When it was Cathvar's turn to speak, he found himself looking out at an audience that would have been impossible just 1 year earlier. Humans working alongside species that were supposedly extinct, former Imperial soldiers sharing research with beings they had once considered enemies, children from a dozen different worlds playing together in ways that bent local physics. We cannot bring back what we destroyed, he said simply. We cannot undo the harm we caused or restore the civilizations we eliminated. But we can choose to become something better than what we were. We can choose to build instead of destroy, to nurture instead of conquer, to grow instead of consume. He paused, looking directly at his former colleagues. The Empire taught us that strength meant domination, that order required uniformity, that peace could only be achieved through conquest. We were wrong about all of it. True strength comes from cooperation. True order emerges from diversity working in harmony. True peace grows from understanding, not submission. The ceremony concluded with something that would have horrified Imperial traditionalists. A moment of silence for all the species that had been lost, followed by a celebration of all the species that had been saved. Music from 17 different traditions played simultaneously, creating harmonies that no single species could have achieved alone. As the gathering dispersed, Kethvar found himself walking through the corridors of what had once been the seat of galactic tyranny. Now those same corridors hummed with activity, as beings from across the galaxy worked together on projects that spanned dimensions, timescales, and ways of understanding reality itself. "Admiral," called a young voice, and Kethvar turned to see a human child approaching. She was perhaps 10 years old, with curious eyes and an infectious smile. "Yes?" he asked, kneeling down to bring himself to her eye level. "My teacher says you used to be one of the bad guys," she said with the directness that only children possessed. "But now you're one of the good guys. How did that happen?" Kethvar considered the question seriously. "I learned that there were no good guys or bad guys," he said finally. "There were just people making choices, and I learned to make better choices." "But how do you know which choices are better?" the child pressed. "You ask questions," Kethvar replied. "You listen to people who are different from you. You try to understand what the consequences of your actions will be, not just for yourself but for everyone else. And when you make mistakes, and you will make mistakes, you learn from them and try to do better next time." The child nodded gravely, as if she were filing away this wisdom for future use. "My parents say the universe is getting better because people like you learn to make better choices." "I hope so," Kethvar said. "That's what we're all working toward." As the child ran off to rejoin her friends, a mixed group that included young beings from half a dozen species, Kethvar stood and looked out through the great windows of the former Senate chamber. Beyond the transparent walls, space was filled with structures that hadn't existed during the Empire's reign. Research stations where species shared knowledge instead of hoarding it, artistic installations that served no practical purpose except to be beautiful habitats designed to preserve cultures rather than exploit them. Dr. Chen appeared beside him, following his gaze to the stars. "Second thoughts, Admiral?" "Never," Kethvar replied firmly. "Though I sometimes wonder what took us so long to realize what we were doing wrong. Maybe we needed to go that far wrong before we could find our way to right," she suggested. "Maybe the Empire had to consume itself with its own contradictions before something better could emerge." "A comforting thought," Kethvar mused, "though it doesn't change the cost." "No," Dr. Chen agreed. "It doesn't. But it might help us ensure that cost wasn't paid in vain." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the galaxy begin to heal itself. It would take generations to undo the damage of 10 millennia of conquest. Some wounds would never fully heal, some losses would never be recovered. But for the first time in Imperial history, the future held possibilities that didn't involve domination and destruction. In the distance, a new ship was arriving. Not a warship, but a diplomatic vessel from the Magellanic Clouds, where species that had never encountered the Empire were just now learning about the Confederation. Each new contact brought new perspectives, new knowledge, new ways of understanding existence itself. The age of empire was over. The age of cooperation had begun. And somewhere in the quantum foam that underlay reality itself, the preserved consciousness of a billion extinct species whispered their approval to the void. The universe was vast, full of wonders yet to be discovered, and civilizations yet to be born. And for the first time in 10,000 years, those wonders would be met with curiosity instead of conquest. Those civilizations greeted as partners instead of prey. It was, Admiral Kethvar thought as he watched, the stars, a very good beginning. The end